Now let's bring in Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Great to have you with us this morning. As we know, more than 37 million people were expected to travel this holiday weekend, more than double the number that traveled this time last year. Certainly a good sign of where things stand in the pandemic. But airline schedules have been reduced dramatically over the past year for obvious reasons. There have been layoffs, reductions. You can't get a rental car. Were we fully prepared for this travel surge, and what has to happen going forward?
Well, as Secretary of Transportation, of course, I'm thrilled to see America getting back on the move. We're not back to normal yet, and we're not out of the woods yet as a country with this pandemic, but we're seeing such progress, and the real game changer has been the vaccine, which is why we're continuing, especially in the run-up to July 4th, to urge Americans to get that vaccine if you haven't yet, and to check on loved ones and others you care about. As people return, of course, we are coming out of one of the biggest shocks, perhaps the biggest shock that the modern American transportation system has ever seen in terms of demand, schedules, all of these things changing. And so the system is getting back into gear. One thing I want to emphasize is safety, of course, considers to be our top consideration. And a lot of Americans will be traveling for the first time. That also means for the first time in a while, maybe encountering flight crews and flight attendants and other transportation workers. Remember what they have been through, what they have been doing to keep you safe, and make sure to show some appreciation and respect to everybody from, a bus driver or operator to a flight attendant to a captain. They have been on the front lines of this pandemic. Their jobs have been in doubt. They are here for your safety, and it's so important to show appreciation for the work that they're doing in this very, very busy holiday weekend.
And Mr. Secretary, to that point, we're also seeing more violent encounters on planes over federal mask mandates. You mentioned the flight attendants and others. There have really been some violent altercations on board. DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said that he thinks those mandates will stay in effect through the summer, but health experts have told us there's really no difference between an airplane or a restaurant or gym where vaccinated Americans no longer need to wear masks. Why not institute that same policy on airplanes?
Well, some of the differences have to do with the physical space. Some of them have to do with it being a workplace, where in some of these transit and travel situations, people don't have a choice. Of course, the decisions will continue to be on the part of public health authorities and driven by public health considerations. But just remember that the flight crews and other workers you encounter, they're doing their job. They are following regulations, and they are there to keep you safe. It is absolutely unacceptable to ever mistreat a transportation worker. And, of course, there is very serious fines and enforcement around that. It's a matter of safety, but it's also a matter of respect. And as we get back, and as we're so thankful to get back to the skies, to get back on the road, to get back to loved ones, let's make sure we're doing it in a way that we can all be proud of.
Let's talk about the infrastructure. You have said you wanted to see major progress by Memorial Day tomorrow. Republicans unveiled their $928 billion counterproposal this week. Calls for about $257 billion in spending, a $1.4 trillion gap from the president's plan. So is that major progress? Is there a deal to be had? Are there still wide differences?
Well, there's certainly been major movement and a lot of good conversations. Look, we started out with a 2.2+ trillion plan on the part of the president. Their numbers in terms of new spending were about a tenth of that. There's been a lot of movement. The president has put a counteroffer on the table that moved by $500 billion. They seem to be embracing the idea that about $1 trillion is appropriate. So there's movement in the right direction, but a lot of concerns. Certainly have some concerns about things that are not in their counteroffer that are really important in terms of speaking to the climate imperative and the climate consequences of our transportation decisions, what we need to do around transit, as well as things like taking care of veteran hospital infrastructure and other things we really believe we need to do right now. So between now and when Congress comes back on June 7th, this is not going to be a break for these conversations. The conversations will continue with the president, with members of Congress, and we remain very hopeful that we can get to a good place. But as the president so often says, inaction is not an option, and we really are facing some serious time pressure as we look to that week following this week when Congress is going to be back in D.C.
The Washington Post is reporting this morning that Republican senators who met with President Biden feel they may have landed on a compromise of $1 trillion over 8 years spread out, and that it could include existing spending plans. Is this a possibility? Is this a possible compromise?
Well, again, the devil is often in the details. Now, when we talk about existing spending plans, I want to make a couple of things clear. One, we need to make investments over and above what would have happened anyway. This is a moment for a generational investment in American infrastructure. Otherwise, we'd be going to all this trouble, having all these conversations and doing all this work just to stay in 13th place as a country. I don't think that's what the president wants, and I hope that's not what the congressional leaders want either. Now, the other issue is this idea that we're hearing about taking money out of what was already committed in terms of the COVID relief dollars. And, right now we're seeing bipartisan organizations of mayors, counties, cities who are really up in arms about this because they're using those resources, of course, in very important ways. Remember, the rescue dollars, those went out to cities, to states, to small businesses, rural hospitals, for schools. We don't have to spend those same dollars twice. Let's keep our commitments. Let's also make sure that we come together in good faith to find revenue that's going to pay for these plans, which, by the way, the president has. He's put forward a way to do this that doesn't touch the middle class just by having fairer corporate tax rates. And we continue to be interested in what might come forward in terms of other ideas, but haven't yet seen one that, at least in my view, is as responsible as what the president's put forward.
Okay, thanks very much. Still sounds like you got a lot of work to do. Thanks for joining us this morning, Mr. Secretary.